Good morning and thank you so much for joining us. We have an awesome video for all of you at home. There's been a lot of hype around the analytics that Justing provided during Heroes CCL Season 3, so we thought in the off-season, why not sit down and really pick his brain and start talking about more in-depth draft stuff. So we have Justing here today to start talking about poke drafts on Battlefield of Eternity. And Justing, are you ready to dive into all of this Battlefield of Eternity fun?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to talk about poke draft on Battlefield and kind of just give general concepts and go through sort of a mock draft situation so that you can hopefully learn something for your own drafts at home.
And for the sake of this draft, and for anyone at home wondering, we're going to go ahead and say that Team 1, or our left side team, or Team A, however we want to break it down, is going to be first picking as we get into Battlefield of Eternity. And so since they have first pick, first ban, Justing, let's talk about these first 4 bans. What do you start out with on the side of our Team A, the left side?
So in general, you want to start by just banning out a lot of power picks if you are that first pick position, depending on how many there are. You want to limit the S tier picks that the enemy gets and get as many as you can. So straight out the gates from first pick, you don't really want to ban the most strong thing that you can. So if you think that Johanna, for example, is the strongest hero, you wouldn't want to ban that from first pick because you want the enemy to have to ban it. So you could look to ban something like a Hanzo from the first pick because it's good for the map, but you wouldn't necessarily want to first pick it as the first pick team.
Now, is the idea for Battlefield of Eternity, do you always want to ban out these race pick heroes, or do you just get rid of like something else? Like, is it like, all right, let's look at the opposing side, the right side, our B team. Can they just go for like maybe a solo lane choke or even a tank or support choke?
So it's a lot harder to choke out the off lane and the tank right now. Even supports, there's a lot of supports available. So banning something that's very map specific from the first pick position in general is a good thing to do, unless there's so many powerful picks that you need to ban something sort of generic, like maybe like a Junkrat. But in this case, there's Hanzo and Li Ming as kind of the main. Hanzo, Li Ming, and Lunara as sort of the main poke heroes on the map. So banning out some of them is a good strategy because it's going to leave you with one of them if the other team bans out powerful picks overall.
Well, we've talked about a few bans here, and so what would your top 4 bans be from both of these teams?
So Rhaegar and Johanna are still strong. I don't think that Rhaegar is as strong as before. So Johanna basically needs to be banned for sure. And then the weird things on this map would be the Hanzo and Li Ming. And Blaze at the end of CCL was seeing insane priority. So I would say that Hanzo, Li Ming, Blaze, and Joe are kind of the things that must be banned away by these teams. So
we'll have those 4 banned out in our draft, but now our Team A, our poke composition, they have first pick priority. How do you kick off the draft here?
So if you're trying to draft for poke, the big one that's left here is Lunara. Junkrat is an option, but it's not really quite the same amount of poke for the objective as Lunara is. She can kind of not only get vision with her Wisp, but also just do a lot of burst damage onto the Immortal when you get that level 7 talent that gives you the burst damage on your Q. So Lunara would be just a solid, good pick for a poke comp.
And with all that burst, I would think that maybe the opposing team that's, maybe trying to respond to some of this, they might look to get some sort of burst healing to kind of mitigate that. Maybe look at like a Rhaegar and then even like grabbing like a solo lane potentially as well. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, taking something like the Rhaegar Dahaka for second pick would be good. The reason that you want to pick your offlane, well, ideally you want to pick a priority pick and a support. So the Rhaegar is available, the Stukov is also an option. And then you'd want to take an offlane. With you banning out the Blaze, it limits the offlane pool a little bit. So getting a priority offlane that you want, whether it's the Dahaka, whether it's the Urel, the Hogger, they're all kind of okay. It's more just sort of how you want to play the game. And picking the support and the offlane there is really good because it doesn't really show anything and it lets you be really flexible with the rest of your draft.
So we'll say the opposing side is going to go ahead and pick up that Rhaegar and Dahaka. As we get into the last portion of first portion of the draft, what do you kind of grab here before the ban phase to make sure that you have everything you need before said ban phase on the poke side composition?
So you don't want to show too much and show things that can be countered easily. So you want to take your support and your offlane with the 2-3 pick here after picking your ranged in the first pick. So Stukov is still available. It could also be a Brightwing, but Stukov probably just a little bit better with a poke composition in mind because you have the disengage with the slaps or the shove with his ultimate. And then I would take the Urel for the offlane. she also peels really well, a lot better than most of the offlaners do. Most of the offlaners really like to follow up on stuff, but Urel with her knockback is very good at peeling if you play her with that intent in mind. And also she's a good counter to a potential Junkrat coming out later if the enemy team looked to pick it.
Well, you actually talk about the potential of these teams, but that might be a little slowed down after we see the Stuk off Urel. We go into another ban phase, and this should be the ban coming out from the side of the opposing team, Team 2. What do you start to ban out here? You're seeing a Lunara, Stuk off, and a Urel already.
So Diablo and the other really tanky tanks like Muradin and Varian are kind of priority around the second ban phase if neither team has picked their tanks. So banning something like a Tychus for second pick is really smart because it basically forces the first pick team to ban the Diablo, because if they don't get Tychus, it will be really hard for their team to easily take down a big tanky tank like the Diablo. So the expectation would be for the team 2 to ban Tychus and then basically force the poke team to ban the Diablo as a response.
Okay, so those are the bans that we'll be seeing coming out in the second ban phase, but as we get into the last portion of the draft, we do have our picks going back over to Team 2, and what's the best case here? Do you want to grab your tank? Do you want to grab some range? Because all we have so far is a Rhaegar Dahaka.
Yeah, so your draft is really kind of hidden right now. There's no clear direction with the Rhaegar Dahaka. It's just really safe. It's just strong picks overall. So you want to kind of continue that and leave your last pick later on to be your flex pick, which can be anything. So ideally you'd take a tank and a ranged here, and you would want it to be sort of your main ranged, your consistent damage dealer that can deal with tanks fairly well, because you still don't know what tank is going to come out from the first pick team, and you want to be able to have some damage against it. So you wouldn't really want to pick something like a Junkrat here, because if, kind of for the same reason of like the Tychus Diablo dynamic, if you pick a Junkrat here, it might be really forcing your flex pick to be something like a Malthael if you want to be able to kill a tanky tank that could come out later. So you'd want to pick something that has good consistent damage that can kill tanks a bit. So picking the Sylvanas would make a lot of sense. It has good, just consistent damage. It's just a good, safe pick. It doesn't really show anything. And then pretty much your choice of tank is up to you. Muradin is really well-rounded, just in general, and combos pretty well with the Rhaegar. Can be saved well with the, or combos with the Dahaka and can be saved well with the Rhaegar. So taking a Muradin Sylvanas still leaves your last pick flexible, and is just really strong, safe picks.
And I do like that Muradin, as you had mentioned, plays really well into the teammates that are already grabbed. You also have Earth Grasp Totem at level 16 from the Rhaegar for that massive slow that really sets up the Dahaka and the Muradin for Stormbolts or Drag. So this composition's coming extremely well together with the Sylvanas Muradin. We have the last two picks coming out from the side of our poke team. What do you round out this draft? We already have the Lunara Stuk off Urel.
So you're going to want to get a little bit more poke now. You would be looking for something like the Junkrat. The other options would be something, maybe a Falstad, Chromie, Zagara are all good options for poke since the Hanzo and Li Ming are banned out. If you're really committed to it, Junkrat is probably the best option for poke at this point. You'd have Lunara and Junkrat, just tons of poke damage. And then for the tank, you want something that can kind of just dissuade the enemy from engaging on you. And you want something that is a little bit more defensive. You don't want to have to be something like an Anubarak where you're diving in, because that just doesn't synergize with your composition. You wouldn't have the best peel then. So taking Junkrat Garrosh would probably be the best option for your last two picks. You have the ally toss from Garrosh to peel, and you also just have a lot of CC and control, and it makes it very scary for the enemy team to dive into your team. If you have something like that Garrosh, you can play really slow and just have a lot of safety for your team to step up and get that poke.
Also, I like the synergy with Garrosh and the Junkrat to be able to throw enemies into the steel traps from Junkrat. Even Urel, who was picked up earlier, she has Righteous Hammer. She could angle enemies into Garrosh, who gets the toss, kind of like an alley-oop sort of deal. I really like this poke composition that we've built here for our left side team, but we're not done with the draft just yet. We still have one more pick on the opposing side, and if you're drafting against all of this, it seems really terrifying to go up against. What is maybe a saving pick, or what do you just kind of draft here with your Rhaegar, Dahaka, Muradin, and Sylvanas?
So leaving the last pick flexible is an example, or this is kind of an example of why it's so important to leave your last pick flexible. You can recognize now with every single thing being picked by the poke team that they're going for a poke composition. So you're looking to draft something that can give you some hard engage to try to force fights on them and kind of get behind their backline. You don't want to play front to back against the poke team, because if you do, they will just slowly whittle away at your immortal, slowly whittle away at your HP, and you'll have to fight eventually. And so even though you have okay engage right now, you really need more. So I'd be looking to pick up something like a Falstad for the last pick, so that you have the chance to look for like a big aggressive gust play. If you don't have anything like that, it becomes very difficult to have any chance to force a fight. And even with the Falstad, it's a little bit difficult because poke is just such a strong playstyle on BOE. But leaving that last pick flexible is extremely important. And just getting something with the hard engage like the Falstad is definitely the best choice.
You also have a lot of different builds with Falstad as well. You could go for the hammering for a little bit of range poke and some burst ability, but also you could go auto attacks to try and slowly whittle away and maybe even burn through the tankiness that is Yrel and Garrosh. I know they have a lot of armor, but at the same time you also do have some armor reduce or some giant killer like talents on Falstad, so that could be big, as well as Sylvanas as well. She does have a few ways to kind of really amplify her damage into the enemies. These are some really great drafts, and this poke composition should be able to execute here on Battlefield of Eternity. The last question I have for you, Justing, of course, is this isn't one of those drafts where, oh, I can just grab it and I win the game. You still have to execute, correct?
Yeah, the execution is extremely important for both teams, but in general, on BOE, poke is just an easier playstyle to win with. So between these two compositions, you kind of have a poke comp on the team 1, and on team 2, you sort of have more of an all-in hard engage style composition. And as long as you're really patient as the poke comp, it should pretty much always win. If your positioning is good and you just play really slow and very patient, you can kind of just whittle away at the enemy immortal over time. And the burden of execution falls on the engage composition to force the fight. And they have to hit a perfect engage or else they just slowly lose the fight. So it's a lot easier to play poke than to play the hard engage style. But both teams can win. The comp won't play itself. The most important thing is just being disciplined and having the patience to slowly poke away at the enemy immortal.
Patience is critical in a lot of our games, and Justin, thank you for breaking down this amazing draft. Everyone at home, we look forward to doing more of these in the future. Please leave a comment on any different types of drafts or maps that you'd like us to discuss further. And also on Tuesdays, we do a fun new segment where Justin and I play some duo heroes, so make sure you leave some comments for all of that. And you can actually check out our latest duo, which is going to be Abathur Illidan, and you can check out this video over here.